And I'm Toby.
And this is episode 43.
Falcon Mark IV. You didn't know that was the title, did you?
Nope, I didn't.
Now we switch to this. And back to us.
And we're back for good, right?
We're back for good. We're never leaving.
Don't you guys wish we never left?
We're back and we're settled in, is what you refer to.
Yeah.
We had a vlog at the beginning of this week that was our wrap-up vlog. It felt a little mishmashy, except we really stayed on topic to talk about the Montana Yellowstone trip. I think it was it was an amazing trip. I think the vlog was very good. Go watch. There's some useful information in there. And we are looking forward to more trips, which leads into
our sponsors. Today's sponsor is you. Because, why don't you...
Oh, you started off so
awkward.
No shouting. You started off so well. I thought, oh my gosh, she's looked at the rundown. She's ready to go.
I did look at the rundown.
Okay.
But I'm not that good.
I have started a Patreon campaign since we have last talked in this photo mishmash. And it is an easy way for you to set up reoccurring monthly donations starting at just $1 a month. Now, I mentioned, a few weeks ago, losing a big chunk of my income because of the Amazon setup.
Yes.
But, and it looks like that may come back soon. I'm working with some folks to make that right. But even with that, we were kind of at this point of stuck, making enough to continue to work, but I have some great ideas. You have some great ideas and are excited about contributing more to this channel than you already have.
Yes.
And that takes some funding.
That's correct.
And I want your support and need your support. So if you aren't already a Patreon supporter, take a moment, look at that first link right down below the description of this video. Actually, it's not there right now. I'll put that in there. Could you put in the,
Yes.
do the little pencil and take all of the show notes and put them over there? Look at that link there and decide how you'd like to contribute. Now, it's not all just money to me. Those folks contributing get, I'm calling them perks, including greater access to me. That will be the best place to get a hold of me and us for answering questions at certain dollar amounts. So take a look, and thank you to those who are supporting. It really means a lot to me. It's not just the money. I mean, it's obviously nice and necessary to further this channel, as I said, but it is the fact that you are valuing what I and what we are doing, and it really means a lot to me, and I appreciate it. Now, we also, though, want to talk briefly about McKay Photography Academy. I'm going to be putting together a little promo video that's going to go out next week that's going to talk about upcoming trips. And this is what happens in my brain as I'm working on videos. I'm falling asleep at night rehearsing different things that I want to say, and I'm going to lead off in that video saying, it's not a fluke. There was a chance after Italy that David and co just got really lucky and everything fell together in a really lucky way. But now we've been on 2 trips that have been absolutely...
I don't know where this is going.
We've now been on 2 trips that have been absolutely fantastic. And it is clear that Italy trip wasn't a fluke and that David got lucky. He knows what he's doing. He knows the people to hire, the places to go. He's done his research. He's picked an awesome team, including us now. And it's clear that I was already excited about these trips coming up, but the fact that I know that they're going to be at this level that is just quite amazing is really wonderful to be part of that.
Yes, indeed.
So, Greece. There is still a spot or 2 left for Greece, joining us in Greece in September. And information just starting to come out about New Zealand next year, about a year from now, which I know sounds far away sometimes, but then...
Sneaks up on you.
That's right. Thanks for finishing that statement.
So, I am not, it's unclear to me whether you already asked these questions or you want to ask these questions. So, but you had some questions this week that you either want to ask or asked.
That's right. Well, we've been trying to do a question of the week, and we're going to hit and review last week's question in just a second. But my question for the week now, we're a month into 2015, but still close enough to spend some time reflecting on this, especially since DP Review is asking this right now. If you go to dpreview.com site, they are asking for you to vote for the gear of the year. And I'm going to pull that page back up, or not the page, but I've got the little thing right here, and says, what is the best product of 2014? And you can vote for 3 of them, and I voted today because I said, oh, something to vote. Voting's always fun.
What did you vote for?
Well, here, let me give you the list, the items that they have on their list, and I'm not quite sure how they arrived at these. I don't know if there was earlier voting that, you know, people did to narrow down the list from everything. The Sigma 50mm f1.4 Art Series, the Fuji XF 56mm f1.2, the Sony Alpha A6000, Olympus OMD EM10, the Panasonic Lumix LX100, the CyberShot RX100 Mark III, the Sony Alpha A7 Mark II, Nikon D750, and the Fujifilm X-T1.
So what did you vote for?
Well, first thing is that's not actually, you guys can go do that. That's fun. Go vote. But I want to know from you, you know, one of the things, we've got this new setup. You're shooting with a wider angle lens. And now when I reach, look at the size of, look at my hand. Just, what is a piece of gear you've picked up this year, or maybe picked up a while ago, but still, looking back at 2014, that was the piece of gear that you were like, right on.
I want to say mine.
Are you looking at comments at all? Make sure people are saying, we can hear you, and things like that?
I am. Somebody said that my mic was too low, but I'm just wondering if I'm not projecting enough. Did you adjust levels on?
I can't adjust individual levels when we do it this way.
Oh, okay. So I just need to speak.
Project.
I will.
Okay. What was the piece of gear that you owned that 2014 you're like, yes, love it, needed it, it was wonderful? What is the piece of gear that you think maybe on this list or something else you've seen is the best gear of 2014? So leave comments. I'll also say a quick word about comments is, and I think it was Dalibor who pointed this out, but I've seen it now, so I believe you. All of these awesome comments that you write while the live show is happening never actually show up afterwards. They're counted in the numbers, which is awesome. I love that high. But a lot of great stuff that you write is lost. So after the show is over and it's up live, if you've said any really awesome things, and many of you are doing awesome and saying awesome things, take a moment and leave it under the video too for those people who don't get a chance to watch live.
Sounds like my mic isn't even on. That's what it sounds. That's what somebody said.
Oh, they're right. Now it is. Moving forward. Okay. So
I said I wanted
Yep.
to say which one was
Say
mine.
it.
Okay, the Sigma 51.4, that's mine, for sure.
Yeah.
How about yours?
Okay. So you get to vote for 3 when you go to DP Review.
Okay, well, I just want to vote for one.
Okay. Vote for 1. And the ones I voted for were the Sigma 50mm lens. I think that lens has shown us what an awesome third-party lens can be and blow away Canon. I voted for the Nikon D750. It's groundbreaking in its price, its performance. Was really pleased with that camera. No, it's not perfect. You can point out that they're having quality control issues with the flare issue, but again, this is one of those things that the internet is like a bunch of piranhas, and you know, a slight issue is like a giant piece of bloody meat in the Brazilian waters. And those piranhas are just, picture that. But it is an issue, and Nikon, you know, they have issues with issues. But Canon does too sometimes. So, but I still think D750, even with that issue. And the last one I voted for was the Fuji X-T1. I think that showed us what a mirrorless camera can do. Well, I don't know. Obviously, the short list is all really good stuff. I think you can make an argument for just about anything on here, although the Sony RX100 Mark III, it's a nice little camera, but I don't think it's gear of the year. So, I want to hear from you.
Yes.
Now and later.
So tell us in the comments, what do you think it was the best product of 2014? Just in your opinion, anything that you own, and then also just in that whole list in general. Vote on DP review and tell us. So moving on, we kind of wanted to go over past questions of the week.
Just one.
Just the one. But the question was, what would you like to make a coffee table book of? What would be the subject? So we're going to go over some of the answers. And I believe this first one is an answer, correct?
Yes. That's the username. 352 Pro said?
People of the Solomon Islands.
Mm-hmm.
That would be cool.
Which, very cool. Yep. For those who don't know, people of Solomon Islands, many of them are, I think, what you kind of stereotypically think of or traditionally think of being a little bit more friendly in terms, a native islander of the South Pacific.
Okay.
Very tribal, very, say that.
Next.
Could be very cool.
Next one is a coffee table book about coffee tables that folds out into the shape of a coffee table. Interesting. And that was from M. Halsari.
Which stole that idea. I knew when I read it. I was like, I know I've heard this somewhere from some movie or something. But, do you know? Seinfeld. That was one of Kramer's crazy ideas. So in Malhalahassi's thing, it would have to be a picture book about coffee tables.
Okay.
Which could be cool.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see everybody's coffee table in places around the world.
Janelle Barger thinks...
Who suggested this question?
Who suggested the question? She thinks she would love to do a book on the wild horses of the Outer Banks of North Carolina and the Black Hills of South Dakota. How about the wild horses in Chincoteague?
Wild ponies, to be technically correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
I think they have made some coffee table books about them, probably. And actually, technically, it's Assateague. Oh, Wild Ponies of Assateague Island. And Zach, photographer eGolf, had a nice shot of the wild ponies of Assateague Island a while ago.
Either way, that would be a cool coffee table book, whether they're horses.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, a word about comments. You already said it, but just a reminder that all of the comments that you guys are posting while we're live will disappear. We'll still see the count. They'll count as comments in the on the YouTube page, but nobody will be able to see them. So if you wouldn't mind after the podcast is over, maybe tomorrow or maybe later tonight, if you want to just post your question, or not your question, but post your answer to the question of the week in the comments below so that we don't lose it.
Yep. I'm just reading people after we got the mic turned on for Christina. They said, much better. Bingo! Now it's okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And I am still keeping track of the comments, so if you have anything to say.
It wouldn't happen if you did every video with me, then I would never turn off number 2 mic. So you should just do every video with me so it can always be on.
Maybe if we reach a new Patreon milestone.
$1 million. You're expensive. She's expensive.
I'm expensive. So, week in review. Let's move on to the week in review. We are briefly just going to touch on Montana one more time. If you haven't seen our last video blog, go and watch it. We go over our favorite pictures that we took in Montana, just about the general experience we had with McKay Photography Academy and their team and all of the participants. And we go over some footage as well that I shot while I was there. I was doing a lot of video.
Yep.
So
do you have a target date for finishing your video?
No.
No. Okay.
I don't. I am currently up to my neck in things to do. So ideally within the next couple of weeks, but who knows really. So anyway, yes, so go watch that last video blog. You released a video, a comparison video of big zooms. right? While we were in Montana, you did a lot of testing. We all kind of, everybody tried out all the different lenses we had.
Technically big telephoto zooms and 1 prime, and I called it big zooms, but it's a little generic, and somebody was even like, you're using the terminology wrong. Yeah, because a zoom lens could be a wide angle lens, but these happen to be telephoto zoom lenses. Go watch that. It's a little bit on the long side. Spoil the review if you haven't. They're all good lenses. They all offer decent values. In my mind, if you have the money, the Canon 100 to 400 was just fantastic. It is the lens that I kept picking up again and again because it was so easy to handhold. It felt lovely in the hand. Its focus was blazingly fast. The Sigma's focus wasn't bad. The Tamron's focus wasn't bad, but you noticed that it was focusing. There was enough time there that you're like, it's focused. The Canon, it would be focused before I blinked. And I don't mean to exaggerate like that, but it just was nice, both on the 7D Mark II and the 5D Mark III. It's mostly shooting center focus point. I wasn't always letting it decide focus point. So you might see some differences there, but I was really pleased with it.
Not sure what you're talking about. Sorry, I'm looking at the comments.
That's okay.
See, this is why we need an extra hand with these.
An extra hand?
With these shows.
Oh, right. That reminds me, because in the vlog, I had my hand down here, and it looked weird. So the other bit of week in review is so current. It's hot. I was going to lick my finger, but I don't want to lick my finger. It's hot off the presses. Exactly.
Is that how it goes?
Yes, exactly. Then you're supposed to put it on me, because I'm so hot.
Oh, right.
Is rumors of the 5D S and 5D SR, which I've seen folks in the chat room already starting to talk about, because that is big news. We're 1 week away from the announcements, the official announcements, the NDA embargoes ending, when sometime around midnight or just after in a week, we will have lots and lots more news. But usually, this close to announcement time, specs are pretty solid. So we've got 2 50 megapixel cameras. They look and sound very similar to size and shape of the 5D Mark III, except they got that 50 megapixel sensor in there, and the R version has dropped the low pass optical filter. So you get the very sharp images. It's going to be for your studio, your landscape, stuff that you want to really blow up. Pixels. That's a
lot of
huge
megapixels.
amount. There is, I think, some disappointment, and we're now hearing that, I didn't talk about this in the video because I hadn't seen it yet, that the 5D Mark IV, which is really what most of us are waiting for, another jack-of-all-trades camera, not a massive, massive megapixel. We're hearing now that we're not going to know or see that until maybe August.
Right. I'm a little disappointed in that because it's a little bit, I was kind of hoping for a March announcement and maybe availability in March.
Because that's kind of what we've been hearing.
Yeah, and so that means that I won't be able to get it until probably midway through wedding season. So it's a little disappointing.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, we've talked about the dynamic range. You being pretty bummed once you saw when I was reviewing the Sony A7R. You're listening because I'm talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
When you saw the dynamic range out of the Sony A7, and even the Nikon some too, being bummed about that. But dynamic range aside, is there anything you're really unhappy with about the 5D Mark III?
No, just the one thing on the focusing system,
Right.
that where the light turns off and doesn't light up.
So the focus point doesn't light up.
Yeah.
Until you're using it, which can be frustrating. And it's something the 5D Mark II did, right?
I thought so. Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like we're dying for an upgrade, but there's that geeky, geary head side of us that you even have a little bit that's like excited for a new thing.
Right. Well, the bottom line, I think, is that if they don't really do a good job with the 5D Mark IV, I don't believe that I'm interested in either of the ones that were leaked today.
Why not?
Well, the megapixel count is way too high. You know, if you shoot a wedding with those things, one, you have to get new memory cards because you're gonna fill them up way more quickly, and hard drive space. And you know, hard storage is getting cheaper, but I don't think that I'm ready to double.
Are you going Ken Rockwell on us?
No.
You're gonna start shooting small JPEGs?
I mean, we're talking about doubling the current.
I know. What
size.
are you all right with saying? What do we come home from a longer wedding with gigabyte wise?
Yeah, I mean between the two of us.
120.
Between
100?
120. I don't know the gigabyte. I should probably around 120.
Yeah.
So we would be talking
On a
about
longer wedding.
potentially like up to 300 gigabytes of new data. So
Per wedding.
per wedding.
Yeah.
So that's a little outrageous.
Yep. You use the crop. They're going to have the crop modes, 1.3x and 1.6x.
But still.
I know. Still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that. To the 5D Mark IV,
Yeah.
which was going to be announced a little bit earlier.
So now I said in my video, which went out earlier today, went out, that I don't think the 5D Mark IV is going to have 4K. But now, that was because I thought we were going to hear about this spring. But now knowing that it's not coming until August, I think 4K is a definite possibility. Rumors are saying 4K, and I'm saying sure. By that point, Canon's, a step behind where they have been for a while now in video. And I think it's logical for them to put that out. If it came out sooner, then I think they really would say, look, go get our cinema line. We don't need 4K. But that 5D Mark IV, August, 4K, modest megapixel increase, so not a huge jump. Remember, the 5D Mark II was 21, and the 5D Mark III is only 22. Not a huge difference. And significantly better in low light, though. Really targeted for low light photographers like us for long periods of time in the wedding. That's all from Northlight Images, and so we'll hear. Talking, it's not on the rundown, but I should mention that we should hear about the Nikon D7200 next week as well, which will be exciting.
Sorry, say that again?
Nikon D7200. We should hear about that next week as well. The follow-up to the D7100 is what we're hearing. And I got to get my hands on the D5500, which should start shipping in a week or two. That's on my list to get in and get reviewed. Let's talk a little bit about Canon sales in general. We had quarterly earnings reports. Yeah, not surprising. They're down a good bit, and across the board, not just their point-and-shoot sales, which are being slaughtered by iPhone and smartphone sales. Consequently, Apple sold a buttload of stuff and broke records for the most quarterly profits. Let me share this screen with you briefly here so you can see what I'm looking at. Okay, so we've got operating profit rose slightly, and then where it says Canon said its sales of compact cameras are expected to fall to 7 million from 9 million. So dropping by 2 million. That's a significant amount. Interchangeable lens is roughly flat at about 6.5 million units they project for this year. Overall sales projections are up. Remember, Canon's they got a lot going, so it's not just cameras. But I think it's interesting, interchangeable lens sales are expected to stay relatively flat. People are using their iPhones. They work well, they're with them all of the time, and I think that they're less likely to replace an older DSLR that they have or even move up to a DSLR. There's still plenty of people, millions and millions, that are out there and excited about photography and buying these cameras, but they got a lot of options now, a lot of good options that aren't just Canon DSLRs, which for many years, it was. Yeah. So, what I'm trying to figure out is, I bet similar people said this about Kodak a few years before they failed, but can Canon really lose it this bad? I wonder. I'm concerned. I want to see what these high ISO images look like out of the 5D S and R. With that many megapixels, somebody said it's going to look terrible with that many megapixels. Well, the pixel density is actually very similar to the 7D Mark II.
Okay.
So, the 7D Mark II is good. It's not awesome. It's not the top of its game, but it's good. So, but it'll just be really interesting. Are they going to fail slowly, or are they just in a little bit of a slump and they're going to come roaring back, or what? That's what I'm curious about. So
I don't know. We'll
they
see.
got a lot of stiff competition.
They do. That's for sure.
So I'm going to move this over here. Do you need anything over there?
No, I like that.
Okay, good.
Okay.
What's next?
So Sports Illustrated, following the lead of other publications in the last recent years, have fired or laid off 6 full-time staff photographers.
All of their full-time staff photographers, which happens to be
Oh,
6.
yeah, so 6 full-time laid off. But it says 20. Oh, Chicago Sun had laid off 29 of them. Yeah, so that's a little disappointing.
It is. I mean, it's this continuing trend. You say, well, I mean, what is Sports Illustrated known for?
Their pictures.
Their pictures. And they had some fantastic photographers. Now, we should feel slightly bad for these photographers, but at the same time, I don't think they're going to be hurting. They are top of their game. They're going to be picked up by other people or freelancing in a lot of ways, probably for Sports Illustrated.
Well,
they're just not the full time anymore.
I don't think you can say that for sure. However,
that's true.
I mean, you can't. Sure. It's still a bummer to lose your job, and like whether or not you're like really hot in the industry or not, it's a bummer. But I think this just, you know, it's a statement about the current state of the industry and the fact that photography is slowly, maybe not so slowly, becoming less and less valuable to some people. You know, everybody these days has a camera, and this is something we've talked about before. You know, stock photography has blown up. There's just tons of stock photography around, and just people who are willing to work for pretty cheap. So, you know, I don't think that it's a huge crisis, but I think it's definitely making photographers and they're, you know, earning their livelihood a little bit harder. So yeah, so it's kind of a bummer.
Kind of a bummer. Yeah, it is. But it's just really, somebody just said photojournalism is dead, E.J. Bernal. Unfortunately, I don't think it's dead, because we are an increasingly visual society, increasingly looking for video and photos. Look at the popularity of Instagram. Now, I don't think we can put Instagram and photojournalism necessarily in the same sentence, but we are a very visual society is my point. And I think it's this reliance on freelance and less on dedicated photographers that is an interesting trend, and not an all good one.
Right.
I was doing a little reading about Sports Illustrated, and I think one of the things another photographer who hasn't worked for Sports Illustrated said is that these guys are not at the top of their game, not only at the top of their game, but they had a look to them and a consistency across the magazine. That now, obviously, not all of the pictures in there are all just from these staff photographers, but that had some value to it, and clearly the people running the company don't think it did, and
right.
whether or not it's going to work for them down the road is interesting.
In the comments, Trevor just pointed out that, you know, what's really a dying industry is print, you know, the print industry. So that's a really good point. I mean, it's a possibility that Sports Illustrated just has seen a dropped sales in the last few years, and so they can't really afford to have these photographers on staff. So yeah, from that perspective, I can see that happening.
I think it's interesting that they only had 6 full-time, you know.
It's unclear. It's unclear whether they 6 was all of the ones that they had.
They had 6 full-time photographers on staff. They all are fired.
I see.
Back a few, you know, other places have made headlines in the last year or two firing their photography staff, including the Chicago Sun-Times. They have since hired a few back. They fired all 29 of them, hired a few back. But the other thing that they're doing, for better or worse, is teaching all of the reporters how to use their iPhones better for photos and video. It just, you know, I don't know why especially it bothers me, but it just seems like using a cell phone to document really important photojournalistic things is not the best approach.
Well,
but
so I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. But it is and it isn't, because on the one hand, cell phones, iPhones, they have really nice cameras and they're really, really unobtrusive. They're tiny. So in terms of photojournalism, you could approach a scene and be very inconspicuous, very, you know, and get really great pictures by not making yourself, you know, to a parent or seen. On the other hand, yeah, the quality that, you know, you would get from those phones is probably not going to be that great. So, you know, in terms of a low light situation or something that's happening really quickly, I mean, you don't have the same controls that you have with a professional level SLR or DSLR. And so, yeah, you're definitely not going to get, you know, the same quality of photos, but I can see the benefit.
Yep. Okay.
So moving on.
Moving on.
Apple's Photos for OS X is delayed. So it was supposed to come out January of this year, beginning of 15.
Yep.
And now it has been pushed back to when?
We don't know.
Oh.
There's no word about it. So this is supposed to be the replacement for both iPhoto and Aperture, kind of a blending of those two. That you know that you already have the updated iPhoto or photos on your iPhone, right?
I think so.
Okay. I think it's
I'm
a little
not
different,
sure.
right? But it's just curious that, you know, they've killed Aperture, but they don't have a good replacement yet, which I think people are just, while they're waiting, people are going over to Lightroom, which I think is the place to be anyway. You can argue against that $9.99 a month, but it gives you Lightroom, Photoshop. They're wonderful together. I showed during the course of the Montana trip how to stitch panoramas together with the two of them so very easily. It just works really nicely. And plus lots of other things. So that's all. It's delayed. Do you care? Are you waiting for it? Were you excited about it when you heard the announcement?
I wasn't.
Okay, I was asking them.
I know, but I just wanted to chime in because why not?
I'm going to put this away in a minute, but it's been out here. I did this review about the Case little DSLR remote before we left, and we used this a couple times on the trip. So just a trip update report is really handy for being able to pull images off a camera that doesn't have Wi-Fi built in, like a 5D Mark III. No word on whether or not the 5DS and 5DR will have Wi-Fi.
I don't think, if it's not announced, I think there's a possibility that they won't.
I agree, and especially since
cool feature.
If it was not in the 7D Mark II with a magnesium alloy body, which these two also have, it's probably not going to be in that. So there's still room in the world for things like the Case DSLR remote. Now, I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, if it will peak up or not, but we have running my delivery today. Now, I put that Instagram video up a few days ago of the snow lapse. And the snow coming down was exciting, but it wasn't as exciting as I wanted. So then I panned during the snowfall time lapse. And that was all in post-processing. I just in Final Cut just dragged, changed keyframes, and moved it. And somebody said, Nick, I think, said, you must have a new toy, like a motorized slider. No.
Not yet.
But I do now. It arrived today. It is Capture Beyond Limits Nebo motion slider. I backed it on Kickstarter. I'll have a video coming out in the next week or so. Lots more about it, but we're running a time lapse right now. It's running across, and maybe we'll use that for future intro videos and things like that sort. It's motorized. It's got a little motor that pulls the camera along on a slider. The one thing about live is I can't show you stuff and splice it in, but it's right there, and you might be able to see the GoPro peeking up soon. I think it's going to hit the end before we hit the end, but it's pretty nifty. It's cool. It's fun.
Yep.
I'm excited to have one of those. And, well, yeah, I haven't backed a whole lot of Kickstarters, but this one was one of the few ones that has been on time. Said it was going to get it in January. It arrived today, last day of January. Is today the last day of January? No, tomorrow is, but I don't think FedEx usually delivers on Saturday. So, okay, I want to talk next about firmware updates. I got another post going to come out in the next week that kind of outlines some different firmware updates that have happened in recent weeks. The one I'm going to talk about right now, though, is for the NX1, which you all have said, please review that. I'm working on getting that camera in here to review. There's a lot less excitement about it now that it's been in the hands of some professional photographers and we've gotten some information about it. And I talked about that in the last podcast, so I'm not going to go over it too much again. But really serious firmware updates firmware update for the NX1 This is firmware version 1.2. I'm just going to I picked out some highlights from a really long list. It's always just kind of exciting. They did this with the original 7D as well. There was that firmware that came out like a few years after the camera was out, maybe 3, that really bumped up some of its specs and made a significant difference. It's always kind of exciting because you already have it. You're like, ooh, it's a little bit newer now. So in movie mode, most of these for the NX1 are targeted at movie mode. Audio levels adjustable during movie capture, ISO adjustable during movie capture. Those things should have already been in there, but now they are. 23.98 frame rate and 24 frame rates for the 4K UHD and 1080. That's nice as well. Pro movie quality setting added for 1080 video. Luminance level settings. So this is bringing up in a professional level of like the GH4 where you can set luminance levels from 0 to 255, 16 to 235, or 16 to 255. You can control the autofocus speed for smoother refocusing. You've got 3 settings for that now. The AF responsiveness control dictates the camera's readiness or willingness to change AF subjects. The smartphone app can now operate as a remote using Bluetooth instead of just Wi-Fi. And it's got a quick transfer mode to automatically send thumbnails to a smartphone as they're shot. And it can pair with multiple smartphone devices. I don't know if that's at the same time or not. And there's a trap shot feature. Fires the shutter when the subject crosses a specific guideline. It's pretty interesting. So it's like motion capture, but specific guideline. There are a bunch of customization options added, so you can change buttons on the back now to be a whole host of different things and added in. There was like 5 or 6 of those in the line as well. Let's compare and contrast that with the 5D Mark III firmware that came out this week.
Yeah, let's compare and contrast all of that stuff that I didn't just listen to.
Oh, well.
Because I was answering comments.
There it all is written.
I know.
Okay, 5D Mark III, better compatibility with autofocus and wide-angle lenses. And fixed some language issues with the Russian language menus.
And that's it, right?
Yeah. Now, I mean, again, other than the focus issue, but it'd just be kind of fun if they added some new things in. Like,
and they can.
Hey, in the 7D Mark II, we're doing that bulb mode where you can set the timer for the bulb mode, or the intervalometer is built in. Why don't we just add those 5D Mark III? Here you go. Here you go, folks. Enjoy a little something. But speaking of wide-angle lenses, I think one of the reasons this new firmware is come out.
Because they want to sell you more stuff.
Well, they want it to work with a new wide-angle lens coming, the 11-24 EF f4 USM. So 11-24 on a full frame. This is an EF lens, so full frame. That's wide. Mm-hmm. That's a wide lens.
That's like egg-shaped heads all over the place.
Yeah, you'll probably want to shoot next with that really close.
Oh yeah.
Let me see how big I can make my head seem.
Oh, stop it.
So, I don't think there's a word on pricing yet. Again, this is rumor. This is going to be announced with the 5DS and the 5D SR next week. I'm guessing 11-24 f4. Mm-hmm. What do you think price will be?
1100.
I'd say a little higher. It is f4, no image stabilization in it.
It's an L.
It's an L, yes.
Yeah, so 11 to 1400.
I think in that range is good. It's going to be weather sealing, SWC coating, ASC coating, fluorine coating, super UD lens, 1 UD lens. It's going to be a high quality lens. Very wide. No, I mean on a crop sensor. Yep, I think on crop sensor you have better options for a lot less money.
The lens we're using, is that even a lens that is still
made?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
So folks who don't know, I mean, with the GH4 that we've been recording these shows now with, and live shows as well, we have the Metabones adapter, which lets us use Canon lenses on it. And we've actually found, because when Christina decided she wanted this look, she is the boss, we didn't have a wide enough lens until we dug out of the old lens basket over there, the Sigma 18-50 f2.8 EXDC, which I don't think they make that exact copy anymore. It's a nice lens. It was my first lens that I bought because I didn't want the kit lens. Back in the day when I bought my Rebel DSLR, the kit lens was pretty terrible. They are much better now, but they are still limiting. we'll get into a discussion about kit lenses some other day. So 18, but 18 is the same as a kit lens, so you're trying to say it's wider. It's not really. What I was trying to hint at is the Tokina 11 to 16, which is a nice wide lens for APS-C type cameras. Interestingly enough, they've got a new one out now. We now have 3 versions of the 11 to 16 f2.8. Each is supposed to be slightly better. Now, actually, version 2 really was just supposed to be a benefit for Nikon, has the chip or the focusing motor. I don't remember exactly. I think it's the focusing motor. But version 3, I think, is supposed to be a little bit higher quality. But I just think it's funny. If you search for Tokina 11 to 16 f2.8, you'll now get 3 lenses, 3 versions of the lens. This one has Pro in the name, so it must be Pro. That angle lens review, 10 to 16, Sigma 10 to 22, or Canon 10 to 22, and this Tokina. If you need a wide angle low light lens, Tokina is very nice. Otherwise, just get the Canon. Randall, if you're watching this, Randall, hi Randall, used the 10 to 18 on the Montana trip. He was one of the participants on the Montana trip that has watched videos of mine, and he got some really nice shots. It's a good lens. The only downside is low light because you're starting at that f4.5, so keep that in mind. Other lens that is out, the Tamron 15 to 30 f2.8 VC for full frame. That lens is out and starting to ship very soon, if not already. I have it right here and show it to you. No, it says coming soon.
Aurelian says, how about the Samyang 10mm 2.8?
Woo! All of those, let me show them the Tamron first while we're talking about it. So here's the Tamron, $1,200, 15 to 30, so not quite as wide, but a nice usable range, maximum and constant f2.8 aperture with VC. Hearing some early reports that this lens is sharp, and people are amazed at the level of detail they're getting handheld at very low shutter speeds because 1, it's wide, and 2, it's got good VC. So another thing that I hope to shoot a little bit with, I mean, for our work, and again with a 10 to 18, you know, I own that 10 to 18. In Q comments of give it to me, but I don't hardly use it because I just don't personally find very wide shots that work well for what I do and for what I shoot, especially weddings and things of that sort. 24 on a full frame is as wide as we need to go. What is 18 on a crop sensor? It's 1.6 times 18 is 30 something around there. You gonna do that math for me?
Nope.
So, okay. So, who asked about the Samyang? So, Samyang,
yeah.
Bauer, Rokinon, they all make prime lenses. They're all manual focus only. And for the money, as long as you don't mind manual focus only, they offer excellent sharpness, really good colors and contrast. They are nice lenses to use. Just have to remember that they're going to be limited in their application, you know, because it's manual focus only. Especially on something like Canon that doesn't give you focus peaking unless you're using magic lantern, and we're stuck on this. So let's go back here. So they're good lenses. And again, manual focus, if you can handle that, get them. They're all basically, what I've heard is they're all made by the same company, but then they just get branded and distributed by different distributors. Samyang, Bauer, Rokinon.
Alrighty.
Yep.
Okay, so we are at...
Oh, I wanted to mention, when I was talking about firmware, I just wanted to say...
GoPro.
Yeah, the GoPro firmware. We've got rumors that... actually, no, not rumors. GoPro is coming out with updated firmware for their Hero 4, which is going to allow really high frame rates for some super slow-mo. I've seen some sample footage. It looks all right. Nothing amazing. The issue with the GoPro is it's so wide that, you know, it's just very wide. But the firmware is also supposed to, and I think this is for Hero 3 and 4, allow the camera to take your time-lapse images and create a movie in camera, which 95% of the time, maybe even 99% of the time, when you're shooting a time-lapse, what do you want as a result? You want a video file. So I'm interested to see how well it does. In my behind the scenes for the snow lapse that just the Patreon subscribers got to see. I talked a little bit about the 3 different methods I used to take the individual still images. One, brought them into Lightroom and processed them, exported them into LR time-lapse, or 2, brought them into the GoPro app, which is much faster, but a little bit more limiting in your control, exported it as GoPro Sign form, which looked good, or exported it as GoPro H.264, not GoPro, but H.264. So if it converts it in camera, which is something the Garmin's Verb does, and there's other cameras that do it as well, even the GH4 does it, I'm curious to see how much control you have over it, and yeah, but it's nice. It's nice that that feature is there. I liked it on the Verb that you just shot a time lapse and then you had your video file done when you exported it off the camera. So that was good. That was good.
Okay, so moving on to our no discussion. We actually don't have a discussion this week, but we did want to show you guys a really cool video by the slow-mo guys.
We're just going to show a very small segment because, well, I don't want to steal their video.
You should definitely go and watch it.
Yep, it's linked. Did you get all the show notes under there so people can look at this stuff?
No.
Aaron, you've missed everything in the podcast so far, but you haven't missed the answer to your question. We'll get to that in a second. Sorry, I just happened to look at the comment. This is, Slow-Mo Guys are awesome YouTube channel with videos of stuff happening in slow-mo. They've recently filmed the inside of a camera when you take a picture in slow-mo. I'm going to bring it up here. And I have it queued up, so I'm just going to show this one part, but I want to stress again that you need to go watch the whole video, especially the showing the differences between, there's the mirror flipping up, there's the shutter opening, and the shutter closing, and the mirror flipping back down. Now, oh, I stopped them in such a nice place. They do that with different shutter speeds, and they put them all side by side so that you can see the difference. It's really awesome. Here's some takeaways that I want you to take away from this video. Lack of better word. I need the show notes you had up there. One is you can see why, or you should be able to see why mirror lockup is important at those slower shutter speeds. As that mirror comes up and hits and wiggles, and it's right there. You think about that, about how mirror lockup is important when you're shooting at those slower shutter speeds on a tripod, because handheld doesn't really matter, your hands are moving anyway, that you want the camera to let that quivery mirror settle out before it actually takes the picture. So keep that in mind. Mirror lockup is important on the tripod, shooting at those shutter speeds down around 1/4 of a second to a second. What I've heard, and I've never really tested this myself, but below a second, slower shutter speeds than a second, it doesn't matter as much because the camera stays there longer, gathering the image more, and so any little quivering at the beginning is kind of canceled out by, you know, the scene burning itself into the sensor for a longer period of time without shaking. So, but also what I've heard is with these higher megapixel cameras that we're starting to use more and more, they are a little bit more sensitive to camera shake from the mirror lockup, from the mirror flipping up. So keep that in mind. The other thing I think is interesting is talking about rolling shutter. Or, well, let's not talk about rolling shutter necessarily because that's the video and electronic side of things. But the fact that if you're using a flash, you watch that, you know, shutter come down. And
you can see why you get that banding when you can't do high-speed sync.
That's right. Yep. Yep. So, one thing that they did not show, and this was related to one of the questions I pulled out from a YouTube video the other day, they don't show the aperture blades because those are in the lens.
Right.
And the other thing that does happen is most of the time your camera, when you go to take a picture, your camera's lens is at its maximum aperture. And when you push that shutter button, the blades close down to your desired aperture, then that mirror flips up, shutter does its thing, and then the blades open back up. So I'd love to see them, you know, take a lens partly apart and show those aperture blades opening and closing as well.
So I have a question. When you have a camera that you can shoot, you know, that has a that basically does not have a limit in terms of syncing with the flash. That you can sync the flash up to, you know, whatever shutter speed you want. How does that work? Is that a camera that you expose the sensor completely? And then where is the shutter in that case? I guess that must be an open shutter, right?
I think that is electronic. That is the global shutters that are electronic. And basically they work by turning power onto the sensor, which then lets it collect the light coming in and turning it off.
So all medium format cameras have global shutters?
Oof,
or not all medium format, but...
Is that so? Is that true? Medium format cameras really don't have a
not all,
flash
I
sync
don't,
speed?
I can't say that all of them for sure, but like for example, the one that our friend Steve had, I don't know if he had a global shutter or it was just a different type.
A global shutter, so again, you need to watch the rest of the slow-mo video, guys. This is good. I'm giving a good promo, because at those slower shutter speeds, you saw that first shutter drop down and then the second curtain close. But at the very fast shutter speeds, they almost move in tandem and just expose this little slit. And so the sensor is not getting all of the information at the exact same time. And they even actually have a really cool cork in the face. Shadow is different than what is happening in the rest of it because of that. So a global shutter exposes all of the sensor at the same time. And I guess there's mechanical global shutters, but I don't know. So I'm not going to say. I think most global shutters are electronic, and it just turns power onto the whole sensor, turns it back off all at once.
Okay.
Yep.
So
I had a reader question though. What is dependent on the camera versus the lens? Somebody said, you know, you got your shutter speed, you got your ISO, you got your aperture. So that's them, right? What?
Magic triangle.
The magic triangle, or just the exposure triangle. What of those is dependent on camera, and what of those is dependent on lens? Now, this is pretty basic stuff, but I think it's good to go over it and talk a little bit about it. So, shutter speed and ISO are camera dependent. We saw that in the slow-mo guys video, the shutter speed that is deep inside the camera, and based on the specs of the camera, they're capable of different shutter speeds. Some max out at 1/2000th of a second, some at 1/4000th of a second, some at 1/8000th of a second, and then of course you got stuff that goes a little bit higher, or a lot higher depending on your paying. Aperture is a product of the lens, and that is built into the lens, and those are those blades that close and open, and some lenses have variable apertures, which means as you zoom, you have a different maximum aperture available to you, decreasing, and some have fixed, which is what aperture is at one zoom is the maximum aperture at another. And the little time-lapse thing you just finished. You can't see it, can you? And what else? Oh, focus. That was the last part of their question. Focus is dependent on both. The brains are in the camera, but the motors are in the lens, and some lenses motors are very fast. USM, ultrasonic motors, quiet. Some motors are a little bit slower. So the brains might be saying, here's where focus is, and the lens might be saying, I'm getting there, I'm getting there. It might be like the 100 to 400, for example. So I thought that was a good question.
Yep.
Now, you got some more questions for us?
Yeah, so we are going to start taking live questions, or if you have questions for us, feel free to post them now. I'll be checking the chat. And for now, though, we're going to go over some questions that were posted on Facebook. And then one question that Aurelian had posted earlier to both of us, he or she wants to know megapixel versus low light capability, which one would we prefer? I would go with low light, I think. Definitely.
For our wedding work, then low light would be really nice. Well, if you're a landscape photographer, you're setting your stuff up on a tripod. You don't care too much about how much light or lack of light there is, because you've got time to set up and say a long, slow shutter speed. Most of the time. I mean, if there's wind and things like that, you know, blowing trees, then that's going to affect your look. So it depends. But I do not feel a huge need
leaf shutter.
Leaf shutter.
That's right. Going back to Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
I do not feel a huge need to have a whole lot of megapixels. I think 16, 20 is fine. And I'd be happy to stay here at that 16, 20 mark and just get better and better low light performance. Okay?
Okay. So next question, Elton Young, he said that we were going to talk about ISO settings at some point, low ISO, still giving noise, etc., and what to look for in those settings. I'm not sure what we haven't talked about before that he would like to know. So,
well, let's do a quick summary of, you know, we are not afraid to go to those higher ISOs to get a good exposure, because a good exposure, meaning an exposure where your histogram is nice and even and properly lit, is going to hide noise. And we would rather a slightly noisy image that is exposed properly than a underexposed image or an image that has a blur because we've, you know, sacrificed shutter speed to get there.
Right.
That's what I'd say.
So just in terms of practical use, I would say use ISO to complement your settings, the settings that you've chosen for a particular situation. So you should only turn your ISO way up if you, because if you dialed your shutter speed down, if you made your shutter speed slower, then that would kind of ruin your picture because it would be too soft. Or if you can't have any more, you've reached your maximum aperture limit, you can't go any further, then I would dial my ISO up. So and if you have a camera that is pretty current, T5i, 70D, 7D, on the Nikon side, all of those equivalents, I wouldn't worry about going up to 3200 if you really need to. Remember, the rule of thumb is if you have a properly exposed photo, if your exposure is either at 0 or above, then you're good. You will get some noise, but you will get noise if you shoot a photo that is underexposed at ISO like 600 or 800. I don't think ISO 600 is an ISO, but like 800. So I mean, I would just kind of look at your settings, your shutter speed or your aperture, see what you need to do to get a good picture using those, and then dial your ISO accordingly based on those settings.
Good. Let's walk people through. I'm a bride, and you just walked into the room with your camera. Let's say all of your settings are on 0. It's not a real thing, but and you look at me, and what's the first setting you think about in the camera?
Probably aperture. Yep.
Okay. Probably to separate your subject from the background, or
it depends on a lot of things, on distance from the nearest object to the person. It depends on the amount of light in the room. It depends on what type of picture I'm getting. It depends on a lot of.
Okay. So let's say you've decided to set it at f4 for whatever reason.
Okay.
And then what's the next thing that you do?
I dial my shutter speed.
To what?
To whatever the aperture or the shutter speed necessary to get a proper exposure.
Right.
So then I probably wouldn't go below, anything slower than like 1/200th, 1/125th of a second, because I know that if I go below a 1/125th of a second, and on a whim I have to capture, somebody that moves or something like that, I could risk getting handshake in the picture, getting a soft picture. So I want to really watch my shutter speed, make sure I don't really go under that. So then that's where my ISO comes in. I look at my meter, how many stops or thirds of a stop do I need to dial in my ISO in order to get, a slightly overexposed photo. And then I just dial the ISO in whatever that is. If it's a really dark room and I only have like one tiny window, I will go to 4000 ISO, and Tyler, are you laughing at the comments?
Dalibor says Photoshop. Okay, so yeah, that's good. We don't want to go too long
well,
here.
that's what I was gonna say, but I was trying to be nice.
I'm a beautiful bride, thank you. So you've picked your aperture, you've picked your shutter speed, and then you look at your exposure meter and you change your ISO to get the exposure you want.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and the reason I really hesitate, or I feels like I give a very broad answer, like it really depends on your settings, is not because I want to be a pain in the butt. It's because it's true. I mean, I can tell you that if I get to a bride's room, I'm going to use this shutter speed, this ISO, because the light's going to be different in every situation. So you just kind of have to use your settings according to the light that you have available and just make the best of that.
Yep. I just saw a quick question from, sorry, didn't see who it was, Kev's Bud, and say, I love the in-loop batteries. I do think that they're worth a little bit more money. They're what we use. They last. I've tried the Amazon Basics before. They're fine batteries, but they do not put out the constant power that the in-loops seem to, and die much sooner in my flashes. My testing sample size is very small. I've only used a couple of the Amazon Basics. We have piles and piles of the in-loops, and they continue to work. They do, after a couple years, certainly start to draw down or lose their power, but we use them lots. They get used heavily in a lot of different aspects, and we're quite happy with them. So that. Now, somebody had asked about what we think about the lomography, what was it? The lomography Petzl 85mm f1.2, and I have a picture here to show people. I don't know what I think about it. It looks like a gorgeous, fun lens to put on the front of your camera if you're into kind of artsy style images, because it's going to have a certain look to it, isn't it?
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that look?
Yeah, so I've looked at this before. The lens itself looks pretty cool. It's like, looks like
brass. Want me to put it back up for a second?
Sure.
I'm so good at switching back and forth.
Looks like a really old-timey kind of lens. Looks kind of out of place though on that camera, but whatever. Let's talk about function. So the lens is valued at what, $600, I believe.
Yeah. Sure.
So for me, I haven't used it. So this is just based on perception, samples that I've seen, and thinking about how I would use it. I would say, for me, if I were considering this, I would say, Christina, don't buy it. Because it's $600. The quality is not that nice. You're going to get lots of really soft pictures out of it. You might get some amazing bokeh if you can really nail the sharpness. But yeah, I mean, unless like your thing is to like experiment and use like funky tools. Like there's a photographer that I follow. His name is Sam Hurd, and he uses lots of really like wacky, interesting techniques on his photography. And he, like, one of them is freelancing. He also puts prisms in front of his lenses and creates like rainbows and like what do you call those? The things that you look through that have a kaleidoscope effects. So if you're into that,
that's why we're gonna get married, because I know what you're talking about when you just do this. Actually, I think most people did.
Well, yeah. Anyway.
We'll practice our charades.
So.
E.J. Bernal too has it. He says it's nice
cool.
but not practical, which I think is basically what you're saying.
Yeah. So yeah, if you think if that's your thing to do like artsy things and that's kind of what your style is, then I would go for it because it'll give you a different look than anybody else. But otherwise, if you just want to get like nice sharp pictures, I wouldn't go for it.
How about $600 falls out of the sky and you are interested in doing this type of photography? What's an alternative? The lens composers and lens babies?
I would do, lens baby. I think the price is comparable. I think it might be a little bit more, but I would do the lens 80 because you can control that a lot better.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit
quasi
sharper.
tilt shift lens, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and they have a couple of different ones. But again, it's going to give you a very specific look. Could be a lot of fun, but as E.J. Bernal and others folks have said, not so practical. Okay. Next question. I think it's Aaron. You out there still, Aaron? Tips for portfolio building. I feel like we've covered this some before. So, and also, how do you get into weddings starting out? Okay. So let's take, for example, that maybe you want to start building a portfolio for wedding. Well, that's the first key, is decide what you're going to build your portfolio to. Because I think what a lot of people do is they take a variety of nice photos and they put them online, and there's no, you listening? Because we need your input on this as somebody who's done this. There's no rhyme or reason to the collection of images that they're showing online in their portfolio.
Oh, right.
And you need to make sure that what you're putting out there is the work you want to get more of. So for instance, if I want to be a wildlife photographer, I am going to take these shots from the McKay Academy tour and very carefully say, these are the ones I want to show people to hire me to photograph their cheetahs. I don't know.
Technically, that would be just like a little bit dishonest, because it's not really wildlife. It's like... That's
true.
But, so, I mean, if you were selling, like, it would... Anyway.
Okay, anyway, we're getting off topic. So then the key becomes, you've decided, I want to build my portfolio towards, let's be something more practical, shooting babies. So then you got to decide, how are you going to get photographing babies? How are you going to get pictures of babies?
Right. So, you know, this is a topic that we could talk about for hours, really.
And we will
Maybe
probably soon.
we will do a workshop on it if you guys really, really want to hear more about this. But ideally, you want to think of creative ways to put yourself out there to people that you know, maybe shoot for free for a little bit, with the condition that, I mean, there are certain ways to kind of present it so that you don't get shot, you don't shoot yourself in the foot and set yourself up for not being able to make any money later on. You know, you make it sort of an exclusive offer, limited to a certain number of people because you're building your portfolio, and then maybe you sell some prints. You give some kind of gift, but then you also try to make money a little bit afterwards, doing something else. So then there's no actual loss on them. They can either purchase stuff or not purchase stuff, but they don't lose any money, and you get some work for your portfolio. But yes, I think it's really important that if you know what kind of photography you want to do, that you create a single website for that.
Yep.
And separate websites, if you want to do it all, then you should create a separate website for the other services. Because what's going to happen is, one, you're going to spread yourself out too thin in terms of like search engine optimization. So if you like really want to do weddings, but you also do portraits and seniors and pets and whatever else, and you have all of that on one website.
Plants. House plants.
And people go to your portfolio and they're looking to hire a wedding photographer, then they're going to see all this other work on your portfolio, and that's going to take away from them seeing just your wedding work. So it's not in your best interest to do that.
Yep. I don't mean to hurry you along too much, but we're dancing around a little bit. I mean, Erin, I think, has given it to us. I think she's interested in wedding photography. So let's move on to the next part of the question. Say, how do you get started in wedding photography? There's not one right answer to this, but I think one of the best answers is second shoot for people. Find good photographers in your area that you like their work, and just start emailing them, and don't be afraid you're going to get rejected or just not answered at all. When I decided I wanted to do more weddings, I think I wrote a dozen, maybe for the sake of the story, let's say I wrote over 2 dozen. I heard back from 1. And that was all it took to get my foot in the door, shooting more, building my portfolio up some. So write work to those people. Oh, just released. That was really distracting.
You need to hustle is the point. Is that, you know, if somebody says no, then you really need to find somebody else that you can second shoot for. Some people will pay you for it, which is really nice, but some people won't have the money for it. So, you know, I would go as far as when I started, I actually got really lucky because the first person I reached out to, I was looking for somebody because he had just lost his second shooter at the time. And so we started working together, and we worked together for the following 3 years, really consistently. So I got really lucky, but the reality is that, you know, most people don't get that lucky. So you kind of have to, what I said in my email, I believe, was, you know, I'd really love to build up my wedding portfolio. I want to be able to help you sort of, you know, with your business, whatever it is that you need me to do, carry bags, like clean lenses, follow you around, anything really, just have an opportunity to see how you work, and just make it, I think the key is really approaching it from like, what can you do for them as opposed to what can they do for you. I see way too many people saying like, oh, I want to really work, like,
I'm going to give you the wrap it up symbol.
Okay. I build my portfolio, so I want to work for you for a little bit and then leave you to go start my own business. And I don't think people are, you know, completely in denial about that. I think it's expected, but at the same time, you have to like really show that you're interested in helping their business as well, because they're going to be helping you a lot. So that's a good way to build your wedding portfolio.
That's good. And Murdoch says, you said in a couple of videos that you can lock the aperture of a lens by engaging the depth of field preview button and twisting the lens slightly off of the DSLR. Why would you want to do this? Well, when you shoot time lapses, I love when things tie all together. We were talking about the slow-mo guys and how they didn't show in a lens the aperture blades closing down for the picture and opening back up. When you're shooting a time lapse with a DSLR, those aperture blades close down and open back up again and again and again. However, they're not quite as precise as some of the other aspects of the camera. And in one case, it might be a let's say you're shooting at aperture f4. It might be a f3.9 technically sometimes, an f3.95, an f4, an f4.1. The camera's not recording that, but just the slight variations in the aperture blades. And how that corresponds, or what that translates to in the real world, is in your video that is made from all of these individual time-lapse frames, there is just the faintest hint of exposure differences from frame to frame, and you get a flickering as that changes. Your eye, it's very perceptible to your eye. So on Canon cameras, the trick is to pick the aperture you want to shoot at, press the depth of field preview button, and which forces the aperture blades to go down without taking, and then start to unlock the lens, and the lens will lose power, the aperture blades will stay fixed at that location and will not change from picture to picture to picture, which fixes this flicker issue. Now, this person, Murdoch, is shooting with a Nikon. Low-level Nikons, and some, do not have a depth of field preview button. So what is he to do? Well, you got a couple of options. In post-processing, there are many good time-lapse programs that can fix the flicker. LR Time-Lapse has a deflicker tool. There are lots of them. They'll do it, and it's gone. Works nicely. Your other option, and I meant to grab it before I sat down and wired myself in, is getting an older Nikon lenses. Now, a bonus of Nikon F-mount is that they haven't changed that mount in forever. So you can find really old lenses with mechanical apertures that don't talk to the camera, and you set it and there's no change from picture to picture, from picture to picture to picture to picture to picture. So that's my first suggestion. Find an old mechanical aperture lens. I found one for $5 at our local camera flea market, and use it on Nikon from time to time. It's fun, it's sharp enough, especially for time lapse. You're coming down to 1080, it doesn't have to be amazingly sharp unless you're trying to do 4K time lapses. And that controls your aperture. So mechanical aperture lens, or go ahead and post-process it. It does a good job. Good.
Good.
Do we have any other?
I don't think so.
Well, somebody. It looks like you posted in here. What do we think of having cameras on manual with auto ISO?
Do you want to answer first?
Well, I'll just say that it's only recently that on some cameras with auto ISO on that you can change your exposure compensation. And so without being able to change your exposure compensation, it gets really finky, because then you're hinky. You're letting the camera take over a piece of the exposure triangle, and I don't feel like the camera does a very good job. That's why we shoot on manual so often. But some of the newer Canons, both Nikon and I think the 7D Mark II, you can adjust your exposure compensation in auto ISO on, and I think it's fine. I think it's fine. I'm not going to fully recommend it, but I think it's a fine way to shoot.
Especially if you can cap it at
yes.
At a certain...
They almost all of them allow you to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Hey, if you can make awesome pictures using semi-automatic modes, more power to you. I like the control that I get when shooting in manual mode because I can use my aperture and shutter speed a little bit more creatively, but I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't make great images using aperture priority and shutter priority and auto ISO. So yeah, whatever works for you.
Yep. I will say that, the conditions we shoot in, tend to allow us to shoot manual without too much headache. If you are following a flying bird, though, or something moving fast, letting the camera have some control over your exposure, I think, is going to benefit you. So it really depends on the kind of conditions and what you're shooting. Yep. Are we wrapping this up?
Wrapping it up.
You know what? Let's show folks this. It's been sitting here running. It stopped. I almost had it timed. Well, you know what? If the sorry, look how long my arms are. I'm like Mr. Stretch. I'm glad it almost fell down and broke. So this is, you can't see all of it, and it's a little bit out of focus. This is it. It slides back and forth.
Can I do
over
it?
Here.
Can I do it?
Yeah, let me hold
Can I do it?
Yes. Now, what's over in my hand is actually a watch because I was timing how long it takes to slide along here when the motor is running. And also, next to that watch is the tiny little motor powered by a 9-volt battery. And the downside is that you've got a dial here that changes the speed, but there's no markings, and as far as I can tell, the fastest it goes, it takes about 20 minutes to go from one end to the other. The slowest it goes, it takes about an hour and 10 minutes to go from one end to the other. And I will be talking more about this and very soon. But it's really well made. I think I got my money's worth. I'm happy. I'm excited. You're going to see more stuff from this soon. So, hey, remember, take a moment, hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed this. Thank you to everybody who takes a little bit of time out of their Friday evening to pop into the chat room, ask questions, answer questions.
And find us here again next week at the same time. I think we're going to stick
to this time
from now on.
Yep. Until we have something better to do.
Until we have something better to do.
Yes.
So I'm just making an executive decision about that because
Woo.
You're going to put it off. I just know it. So.
Executive decision. We're calling this the bloopers.
Anyway.
You just made a big blooper. I am the executor.
The decider.
The decider. Also, if you love what we do here, take a moment, pop over to that Patreon channel and Patreon campaign. See what you can do there. And if for some reason you're watching this and you haven't hit that subscribe button, now some of you may say, I don't need to subscribe. I know where you are. I click over, maybe you even have bookmarked. It's still nice to hit that subscribe button. It bumps those numbers up, and that means stuff to some people who might benefit this channel. Thanks. Anything else to say?
No. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook if you want to keep up with our pictures and other random musings that we might have that are probably not that interesting.
Everything I say is super interesting.
So, but yeah, anyway, come back and see us again at the same time next week.
Very good. Oh, and make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter because I teased this, giveaway, that box full of stuff that I still have to give away is sitting right over there. And I see Jeffrey is in the chat room. He's got a nice tripod, that Benro video tripod, ended up on his doorstep. Congrats to Jeffrey. And along with a couple other things as well. And somebody else will be getting something. So sign up to the newsletter. I'll put a link to that right down below in just a minute, or you can find it on the website where it says newsletter in the menu, and sign up because information will be going out within 2 days about that giveaway. Have fun. Good night.
Good night and thank you.
Go take some pictures. then we have this awkward part where it's still running, and I come over here and
This is where we do silly stuff.
And I
for the
stop
bloopers.
oh look, we're still waving there. I go here, and I say stop streaming.
You should have just let me do it because I had it on here.
Well, you didn't tell me. If you had told me, I would have made the executive decision.
Hey, no bugs.
That you could have done.
Remember how bad last podcast was?
Except for I forgot to turn on your microphone.
Okay, stop.
That was